Answers and more questions.
All right, that looks like, it didn't say recording, but it's got a little red dot there.
So for every question, every 1 minute question, you give a 30-second answer?
I can do that.
That's what you just said.
Hey, that means we're gonna come up with more questions.
Are we ready? Okay, we're here with Craig McMichael. He's running for Congressional District 8 position.
You want to take a try?
I'm John Wirtz. With me is Pat Tibbs, Dennis Tibbs, Bill Fessenden, and Larry Rogers. With that, we're going to turn it over to Craig and let him open with his opening salvo there, and up to 5 minutes.
Good evening, thanks for having me. I'm Craig McMichael, running for CD8. I started this race in January of 2013. The idea was our government has failed us. Our current incumbent congressman has openly lied in meetings, broken promises, voted against our Constitution, and it was going to take somebody with a little bit of integrity and courage to remove them from office. I started this mission with the belief that our founders intended everyday citizens to serve in Washington, D.C., and that's what we're looking to do. Normal men and women to stand up and have the endurance and the courage to run for office and win. We ran in the last election, got just under 20,000 votes. It was about 32% of the entire district. Everybody said it was impossible, and actually we've done so good. We've got new opponents in the race, which should help get our incumbent into a runoff. That's the plan this time, and win the runoff election. I'm very firm in my knowledge of the Constitution, my ability to quantify that to the voters, and my belief system is unwavering. I've learned a lot from the last campaign to this one, and we've modified. We're working hard to get our message out to the voters. Primary's coming up in about 90 days, and when that happens, I think we're going to shock the world. When the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee gets put into a runoff by an unknown former Marine, it will be nationwide news, and that'll be time when we spread our message of constitutional freedom back to the people of this country.
Okay. Great, thank you. On question number 2, it was in regards to your interpretation of the 10th Amendment and the principle of nullification. And do the states have a right to nullification? You indicated that the 10th Amendment leaves everything not covered in Articles 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the states. The Constitution gives states the power to nullify federal law that violates the Constitution, but no federal court has upheld the idea. It was your answer. The courts do not make our laws, though, and when in Congress, I plan to fight for this right at the state level. My question is, how exactly will you go about that?
So the way you do that is Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution defines Congress as the supreme law of the land. They can actually overrule the Supreme Court. This idea can be used to overturn rules like Roe versus Wade. There's other things that go along with this. If you push for the fair tax, get rid of the income tax and allow the states to collect the money, when the Supreme Court overrules state constitution, then the states would have some sort of financial backing to fight against the federal government. The way you push nullification has to come from the states. You have to have state legislators that are ready to stand up and fight for this. And so as a congressman, you would have to work with your local state reps to make sure they understood what the idea of freedom was, what state rights were, and that they would push for that on a state level. From the federal government, one of 435 congressmen, you can do very little. But what people forget is the most powerful body in this country is the American people themselves. And so when the American people stand up and they realize they can actually make that change, then that change will happen.
Do you feel like the state representatives would take that mantle and run with it?
I think some of the state reps would. And again, when the people understand the founding idea of freedom, what their rights are constitutionally, and the simple fact that those rights are given to them by their creator and not by the government is just supposed to ensure the rights are there for them and protect those rights, then they would elect state reps that would follow the nullification path.
Okay. I guess one more question. We've got a little time left here, 25 seconds. You have confidence in Joe Strauss doing that?
I do not have confidence in Joe Strauss at all. I think it says a lot about people that have voted for Strauss as speaker. What I always tell people is they say, well, politically you have to do certain things to make it work. I think at some point we need politicians that make a stand against the whole political system. And that's when the people will see that somebody's actually fighting for them and they'll rally to the cause.
Okay.
Okay, I see that you agree that non-citizens are not entitled to any rights. What are you gonna do and how are you gonna make the move to take what they've been given to them away from them?
Yeah, immigration's a big issue, and it's been an issue since our founding. I've studied heavily with this. I've actually been endorsed by Stop the Magnet, which is an anti-immigration group here in the state of Texas. I was one of the founding members of Montgomery County Citizens Against Illegal Immigration to help here in the county with it. What you need to do is you can't even talk about immigration or path to citizenship until you secure our borders. The first step is secure the borders. The federal government in 1986 passed the Immigration Reform Care Act. Ronald Reagan passed that. That one act has all the federal laws on the books that would cure our immigration problem if the Justice Department enforced federal law. And this is the problem with our current government, is we have people that pick and choose which laws they're going to enforce. So in Congress, your power there is you could actually impeach the Attorney General. You could go after Supreme Court judges. You could actually have courage to do what the Constitution allows you to do, to force the federal government to do the right thing. When the federal government enforces those laws, the main caveat in there that would work is employers aren't allowed to hire people that aren't a citizen of this country. It's against federal law for them to do that. If you did that and they couldn't get a job, you took away their food stamps, their welfare, their free education. What you would find is a lot of them come here for the opportunities, but if the opportunities weren't there, they would go back home themselves and try to come in the legal way.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, a couple of questions about the multitude of bases that we have all around the world. If you were to reduce those, or close some of those down, would you reduce the overall size of the military, or would you put those people in some other location? And why hasn't that been done? Is that the Pentagon that stops it, or our congressman that won't do it, or whose fault is it?
Okay. As a former Marine, I've been to a lot of the bases overseas. I've been to Korea, I've been to Germany, I've been to Japan. America constitutionally wasn't set up to be the way we are in the world, enforcing our policies around the world. Unfortunately, we're in the events where we can't just pull out. We have interests overseas that we have to maintain. A lot of those bases could currently be closed. You do not reduce the size of the military in the current state that we're in. You can shuffle troops around, maybe start a new base in a new area of operation. I believe we should have fought hard to maintain a base in Iraq. We worked so hard for the territory there. That region needs our support. ISIS is a direct result of President Obama pulling the troops out of Iraq. Basically what happened is Iraq had nobody to go to, so they went to Iran. Iran gave them support and basically said you had to remove certain people from your government. Those people felt left out, and those are the ones that have started ISIS and started the whole chaos that we have to deal with now. Sometimes the unintended consequences are worse than what you were dealing with to begin with, and political courage goes a long way in that line. Reducing our military right now, the world depends on America and the power. Reagan had a great theory of peace through power, and I think you can maintain that. You show the rest of the world that we're here to help, and that's what we do, but we have to be cautious because with our current $18 trillion debt, if we bankrupt ourselves, we won't be able to maintain a military to protect the world. And so it's a multifaceted issue that we have to talk about. Again, I go to the fair tax, that's a good way to work on that, reduce our debt, zero-based budgeting, and work on strengthening our military overseas.
How many bases do we have overseas? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head, I do not know.
It's a couple of hundred, isn't it?
And the last part of that, to answer your question about why it's not closed, I couldn't tell you. I don't have inside information on Congress or who doesn't want to close certain bases or who does what in the Pentagon. I don't have those connections.
Okay, you gave me a perfect lead in. You're a proponent of the fair tax. You're also a strong constitutionalist. Where in the Constitution is the provision for a federal fair tax?
But the fair tax technically isn't a federal issue, and that's the beauty of it. It's controlled by the states. The state comptrollers control it and actually send the money into the treasury. What I've been trying to teach people is constitutionally, the income tax violates your constitutional rights. The way I explain it to people is the Fourth Amendment says you should be secure in your private property against illegal search and seizure without a written warrant signed by a judge. When the government seizes your money before you receive it, they're violating your rights. The income tax should have never been authorized. The 16th Amendment's a gross violation of constitutional law, and it needs to be repealed. The IRS has been proven now to be a political ally to whatever politician wants to wield its power. And as citizens, we should fight against that. We shouldn't be afraid of our government. That's why the fair tax is a beautiful thing. The states control it, the states collect the money, they give it to the Treasury Department. It really takes the federal government out. And that's the difference between the fair tax and the flat tax that some people advocate. The flat tax is a federal sales tax, like the VAT tax in Europe. That's a bad decision because you're still leaving that power in the federal government's hands, and that's not where it belongs.
So if the fair tax is an opt-in situation, what do you do if half of your states stay opted out?
So it's not opt-in, it's something they have to do, the states would have to do.
Then it's federally mandated. You can't have a cake and eat it too.
Okay, it's a federal mandated sales tax, but it's controlled by the states. And to me, that's the beautiful side of it, is it's state controlled. It will give the states, because right now what happens is the federal government blackmails the states with their own money that they collect through taxation. You saw this in Louisiana when they refused to raise the drinking age to 21 because the federal government wanted them to. They took away their road funds. The government shouldn't blackmail the states with the money that comes from the states. And so that's why you need the tax, you need the money. The fair tax is our safest solution to get to that way. Ideally, we didn't have a tax before and we could do away with it altogether because the government collects enough money without the fair tax. But we can't transition all the way down to nothing.
I understand. Okay.
With Kevin Brady getting the chairmanship of the House and Ways Means Committee, how do you feel that affects his ability to run? And I guess a better question is, will that have a bearing on his ability to run and your ability to run against him?
So, Kevin being the chairman of the Ways and Means is a powerful thing. It's going to bring a lot of money into the district if it goes into a runoff because he's sold out a lot of people to get there. But they know they own his vote now in Washington, D.C. He is a puppet that is controlled by the Washington cartel. The people of this country are slowly waking up to what's going on. Nothing, I cannot stress this enough, nothing in this world would ever control my ability to run. The Constitution gives me that authority as a citizen of this country, and my passion for my country and my government allows me to do what I do. The beautiful thing about my campaign that people never understood, we didn't win 20,000 votes with money. We didn't win 20,000 votes with special interest groups. We didn't take any money from lobbyists. We did it strictly off willpower. My desire to make a change in this country resounded with people in the district, and they came on board to help us out. And that's what we're seeing in this campaign, is we have a lot of help from people that understand at some point what you need in Washington is something different. The biggest question I always get is, politicians always go to Washington and change. Craig, how do we know when you get to Washington you're not going to change? There's a difference between me and most of the politicians. I ran a race against a congressman that everybody said was impossible, and I did it because I believe nothing's impossible. And I never compromised my values. I always maintained who I was. I always showed my integrity and my character. I had people that would argue against me and say, well, I went to a meeting one time and somebody complained that I wasn't wearing a suit. So I went to a meeting the next day and somebody complained that I was wearing a suit. Voters always get upset about something. And what we have to learn to do is stop looking for what's perfect and find somebody who just has the courage to stand up in the room and do what everybody else is afraid to do.
Okay, on question number 4, what should be America's course of action in regard to Iran's nuclear capabilities? You responded, we should have never removed the sanctions on Iran, basically. But I think it's basically, okay, what do we do now? You know, that we're there. What would you do to encourage the next, you know, president or Paul Ryan, if he's still Speaker of the House, in regards to Iran?
So how do you change Iran in the course of action the president took? First, you have to identify that what the president did was a violation of his oath. It was unconstitutional. That Iran deal was a treaty, and a treaty can only be ratified by the Senate. They can call it whatever they want to call it. And if we as American citizens expect Paul Ryan or anybody else in Congress to all of a sudden stand up and start doing the right thing, we're fooling ourselves. The only way to make a change in Washington, D.C. is to awaken the people to what's going on. And the way you do that is you elect people that have the courage to stand in Washington against everybody and speak the truth. What needs to happen in Iran is the sanctions need to go back on. The UN needs to go after them. The U.S. needs to encourage Israel to stand against Iran, because Iran's openly admitted that they're going to destroy Israel the minute they get a nuclear weapon. We cannot allow that. We can't even allow that type of rhetoric coming out of Iran. When you show your power, and that power, Iran probably killed more American troops in Iraq than Iraqis did. At some point, we have to make a stand against these countries. We have to have people that are willing to do what needs to be done. And the way you do that, I wholeheartedly believe, is you have politicians that are willing to stand up and fight.
Some people believe that we should take more of an isolationist approach, and that's somebody else's battle over there in the Middle East. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so originally, constitutionally, that's how America was set up. We did that for a long time. In World War I, we got involved in our first major conflict, and we've established ourselves as a power in the world that needs to maintain. We can't fall back into an isolationist at this point. Sometimes when you leave somebody's problem to your neighbor, it comes to your door. We need to maintain our interests overseas and protect our allies.
So, thank you.
Well, pass it is.
You know, I generally like the fair tax, but one thing that I think is bad about the fair tax is that whole concept of a prebate, which to me just sounds like another huge bureaucracy. So why can't they do away with the prebate and just exempt items that are already exempted right now from sales tax?
I'm not completely against that idea, and I've reached out to the fair tax in DC. I'm trying to get a good answer on that, because that's the big thing a lot of people have. The prebate's set up to help the poor. It really gives you a rebate on food and items that you buy.
But everybody in the country gets a check.
That's correct.
So that's not a reduction.
Everybody gets the prebate check. If I wrote the fair tax out of my office, I would remove that, because I think you'd get a lot more support for it. But in its current state right now, I think it has 127 co-sponsors. It is the best option we have on the table. Sometimes you have to progressively go away from what you're doing, and my belief of the current income tax as being unconstitutional means that there is no option for keeping that. You can't reform something that's a violation of the Constitution. You have to do away with it completely. Fair tax is a good start for that.
And how many votes have they had on the fair tax?
You know, I don't know. It's been for 25 years now. It's been in Washington, talked about. I don't think they've ever actually voted on it in the floor of the House. And actually, what's amazing is our current congressman's a co-signer of the fair tax, but I've seen him in an open meeting admit that it's too bold and it will never pass.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can be a co-sponsor of a bill that you don't openly support.
Okay.
Okay. Obamacare is a big thing, especially this time of the year when you get new enrollments and changes in plans and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure you're not a fan of Obamacare, but what do you think the government's proper role, not a specific plan, but what is the government's role in healthcare?
The government doesn't have a role in healthcare. It's not one of the 18 enumerated powers that they're supposed to deal with. That's a state rights issue. That falls right in line with most social issues that people argue about, and healthcare is one of those. Those are all state rights issues for the states to decide amongst themselves.
Okay. Good enough. There.
Good. I can't take some of his time?
No.
Come on.
Well, if all you wanted to use is what I have left over. After all,
Well,
my
you got
guys,
some
As
of
long as it's a follow-on,
Hey, it's gone now.
I know.
if it's a follow-on,
Lose
you
again.
can do it.
Will you move to DC?
I would not move to DC. I would maintain a residence here. I would probably get an apartment in the DC area somewhere to work. But I would want to come home and interact with the voters in the district, because to me, when you're there, you're missing out on what people care about here. And the biggest thing and what I'm trying to do, if I win this congressional seat, the biggest change we can make is when the cameras get in our face, start speaking constitutional truth to people. But it doesn't do me any good if I'm not here having meetings, actually debating voters about the issues and what they care about and trying to quantify our stance on it, why it's constitutional or not. You can't do that if you live in DC.
So would you anticipate kind of the way Kevin's doing it, come
Yeah.
home on the weekends, or, I mean, that seems to be a pretty good deal.
The big difference is, I wouldn't charge the taxpayers to fly back and forth. The way I view it, you hire me to do a job, you pay me $175,000 a year to do that job. If I choose not to move where it is, I would fly home. I've looked it up, the plane tickets round trip are about $300 a weekend.
You drive back.
It would fall easily in the south. It frustrates me when he brags about flying home 50 times a year or whatever it is, and he bills the taxpayers for those flights.
Um,
But is it cheaper to fly home than rent a place up there? I'm just, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
My next question was, you are a network engineer, and you say it's your company, SCONET is your company?
It's not my company, no, sir.
So you will resign from that company?
Yes, they're aware of that right now. If I win the election, I will work for them until November, when I actually win the November election, and then I will resign, because I'll have to hire a campaign staff. We'll have to go through the interview process of everybody that works for us, because you're required to open the 3 district offices. And then in January, I'll go swear in, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
What, on immigration, what would you do from a federal standpoint to move things along to get protection on the border? It appears that obviously nothing's been done by a current congressman to do that. What 2 or 3 things could you do, or even one, to effectuate that and make it happen?
Well, the first thing you could do, that I would have some control over here, is in the state of Texas. We could work with our state reps in the area that are inside Congressional District 8 to talk to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and try to give them some ability to put state resources on the border. They have that now, controlling it, but you always bump in the issue where the federal government comes in and says, well, no, this is our responsibility. It's your responsibility, but you're not maintaining it. From Washington, as one congressman, you're very limited. Again, this is another issue where you're gonna have to push the people, but most people understand immigration is a problem. There needs to be some sort of security on the southern border, but I think if you take all the perks away from the immigrants that are here receiving goods and services for free, they won't be so quick to come across the border.
So what can you do individually to affect that change?
Individually, you put feet on the pavement, you start talking to people to get them involved, because we need to realize that one man's not gonna come along and be the savior for this nation. It's gonna be the people of this republic that stand up and realize the ultimate ability, the greatest resource America's ever had is the people inside this country. When we realize that again, that America is an exceptional place, and that we have the ultimate power to do whatever we want to do, that's when we'll make that change. I always remind people about the 21st Amendment. Campaigning a lot, people talk to me and they say, Craig, some of your ideas are impossible. The 21st Amendment that repealed the 18th, to me, is in black and white proof that the federal government makes mistakes, and when the people get loud enough about it, they'll overrule those mistakes.
Okay.
How do you feel about not only Common Core, but the Department of Education?
Yeah, the Department of Education is unconstitutional and should be closed. Education should be handled at a state level, more so at a county and city level. There's nobody in the country that knows how to educate their children better than the parents of those kids. When you took it out of the federal government's hands, then the parents would be more involved in the local community and their schools. Right now, a lot of parents that I talk to feel like you can't go to the school and do anything. They won't talk to you, they don't work with you, you don't really have a say in what's going on. It's a bad situation. Education, the whole department needs to be shut down. There's no constitutional mandate for it.
When you go to Washington, the taxpayers do provide an apartment for you, don't they? I mean, they give you a living allowance of some sort?
You know that, I'm not aware of that.
Because you hear these guys talk about living in their offices, and it sounds like they're pocketing their housing allowance. But anyway, I don't know, I'm just asking that.
I can tell you this wholeheartedly, I will not pocket any of the taxpayers' money. My office will not utilize any money that we don't need. And I'll be very open about that. Actually, my goal is to go and bring awareness to the public about what their congressmen are doing, wasting money. You talk about Nancy Pelosi spending $110,000 on alcohol for her airplane to fly back and forth to California. The problem with the Washington cartel, what's happened in our country, is these people live like royalty, and they don't understand the struggle of the day-to-day citizen that works a job just to get by and pay their bills. It frustrates me when you see these fancy parties they have. They're eating off nice china, they basically have servants, they're running around spending taxpayer money, and people are oblivious to it, and they're oblivious to it because they have closed ranks and nobody there talks about it. What we need is one of our own in DC that will actually stand up and talk about it.
Well, we need to get them out of there in a little shorter time. And you have pledged that you will have, how many terms?
3, 6 terms is all you get. I tell people this all the time, and they say it's not enough.
I don't think that's enough, really.
I think it's enough to make a statement. A kid from nowhere won a congressional seat and went to Washington, did exactly what he said he was going to do. I've already committed 10 years of my life to the Marine Corps. When I win this election next November, that'll be 4 years into a campaign, 6 years in Congress, another 10 years in politics. At some point, I want to be Craig McMichael, the American citizen that goes fishing and plays golf. At some point.
At some point, okay. Well, I think you ought to consider 8 or 10 years, you know. We don't want you to just go up there and make a statement. We want you to be long enough to make some things happen.
Well, I'm grooming somebody to come
Okay,
behind me.
all right. Go ahead.
Golf and fishing doesn't pay too well. Hopefully you have a little bit more aspirations for after Congress than that.
I don't know.
Okay,
So how good a golfer.
question number 6 is, if we were attacked again in a similar manner to 9/11, what would our response be? And you gave a general answer, but I guess I'm not even sure I understood some of the way you worded it here. So could you please elaborate on what you think our response should be, if anything, and what should we do differently than we did in 2002 through whatever? Should we attack? Should we declare war? Who should we declare war on?
Okay, so some people don't know this. 2001, I was actually in Australia when we were attacked. My unit was the first ground troops in Afghanistan. And what people seem to forget is we got attacked on September 11th. We didn't invade Afghanistan until the day before Thanksgiving 2001. It wasn't instant retribution against somebody. We actually found out who attacked us and where they were located. We went after them. Our war from the 9/11 attacks was the war against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We completed that mission. People talk about the war on terror. I'm not a big fan on the war on terror because you're fighting an ideology. It's impossible to defeat something that's not a stable country. If we got attacked again, if we ever get attacked by anybody, we need to be swift with our justice. They need to know that America does not tolerate these types of attacks. Our citizens are precious. That, to me, is why Benghazi was so upsetting, is we had a U.S. ambassador killed overseas with 3 American citizens, and there was really no retribution at all for it. It wasn't a video. It was a clear terrorist attack against our embassy. If we're ever attacked, people need to know that it will not be accepted and it will not be tolerated.
So in the example that you gave of Afghanistan with the first 9/11 or the 2001, you went into Afghanistan, but we did not have a declared war against Afghanistan, and to the best of my knowledge, the powers that be in Afghanistan were not the ones that actually promoted the 9/11 attacks.
Well, the powers that be in Afghanistan at the time were the Taliban, and they promoted the terrorist group that attacked us. They allowed them to grow and thrive inside that nation. I think the president at the time was very clear on his mission that either you're with us or you're against us. They chose to be against us, and they are now no longer in power. And that's how clear-cut we need to be. You're either going to help us if somebody attacks us, or you're going to stand against us, and you're going to see the full might of the American military.
Okay?
Question number 1, please describe the qualifications and experience that make you the best candidate for the office that you're seeking. And your answer was 10 years in the Marines and a firm knowledge of our Constitution. Basically, and no more than ever, we need men and women in office and willing to fight for the people of this republic, not for their own greed, power, and Washington. That's a great rhetoric, but give me your qualifications to become a congressman.
Well, constitutionally, there's 3 of them. You have to be 25, you have to be a resident of the state, and you have to be a citizen of the country. So I meet all constitutional qualifications. Other than that, each citizen seems to have their own individual idea. I've had people that tell me I should own a business before I run for Congress. I've had people that tell me I should have a master's degree. I really think what stands me out in this race against everybody that's decided to join was there was one person that had the courage to stand up and fight Washington when everybody said it was impossible, and that was me. We have other people that have joined the race now that they may have experience in a certain political facet, they may have a higher education, a college degree, more military experience. You may have a congressman that's a Ways and Means chairman. But what we need in Washington, our country's falling apart. What we're absolutely dying for is somebody with courage to do the right thing. There's only one person in this race that stood up in January of 2013 when everybody said it was impossible and said, I'm going to run for office and I'm going to win. And that's what we're doing.
Okay. In question 15, and it relates to the mass shootings in recent years. And the question is, what, if anything, should the federal government do to solve this problem? And you replied that under the Second Amendment, all federal gun laws are unconstitutional. Then you indicated that this is a state issue, that each state should make laws in accordance with the wishes of their citizens.